Okay, we're going to continue to talk about ratios and rates. And to remember, a ratio is a comparison of two quantities. A rate is a special type of ratio. A rate is a ratio that compares two quantities that have different units of measure. So Tim drove 120 miles to get to his grandfather's house. It took him 3 hours to get there. Okay, so we've been talking about ratios. We could write this as a ratio, 120 to 3. We could write it with a colon, 120 to 3. And we can also write it with the word 2, 120 to 3. So a ratio is a comparison of two quantities. Now this ratio is also a rate, because a rate compares things that have different units of measurement. We're comparing miles to hours. A unit rate is a rate that makes a comparison to 1. Okay, a unit rate will always have a denominator of 1. So Tim drove 120 miles to get to his grandfather's house. It took him 3 hours to get there. So if you want to write a rate as a unit rate, first thing to do, we're going to write it as a fraction, 120 to 3. 120 divided by 3. We're going to write an equivalent ratio with a denominator of 1. Okay, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. 120 divided by 3 is 40. So we've written an equivalent ratio with a denominator of 1. A unit rate always has a denominator of 1. Okay, Tim drove 120 miles to get to his grandfather's house. It took him 3 hours to get there. So he drove 40 miles per hour. Okay, you can always check a ratio or a rate with a ratio table. So if he went 40 miles in 1 hour, he went 80 miles in 2 hours. Okay, remember ratios have a relationship, a multiplication relationship, 1 times 2, and 40 times 2 is 80. If he drove 3 hours, he would go 120 miles. 40 times 3 is 120, 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so remember, a rate is a special type of ratio. It compares things that have different units of measurement, and a unit rate is a rate with a denominator of 1. Evan paid $15 for 5 cans of juice. Okay, so $15 for 5 cans of juice. If I want to write this rate as a unit rate, I'm going to write it with a denominator of 1. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 15 divided by 5 is 3. Okay, Evan paid $15 for 5 cans of juice. What's the price of 1 can? It's $3 per can of juice. And again, this is a ratio, but it's also a rate because you're comparing money to cans of juice. Okay, and a unit rate always has a denominator of 1. Okay, so remember, a rate is a special type of ratio. It has different units of measurement, and a unit rate always makes a comparison to 1. Okay, or it's going to have a denominator of 1. Tim went 40 miles per 1 hour, and Evan bought cans of juice that cost $5 per can of juice.